The human was supposed to be dead. That's what I told the High Council. That's what I wrote in my official report. That's what I convinced myself of during the sleepless cycles following our miscalculation on Kepler 4. But standing here now, watching 17 massive warships drop out of hyperspace above our homeworld, I'm beginning to suspect that Lieutenant Marcus Kane might have been slightly more resilient than anticipated. Advisor Vex Prime. My aide's voice trembled through the comm. The human ships are requesting immediate audience with the High Council. Oh, wonderful. Absolutely fantastic. The one species in the galaxy known for holding grudges longer than a Regillian winter, and we just happen to maroon their golden boy on a planet filled with carnivorous flora and acid rain. What could possibly go wrong? Tell them we are in session. I stammered, my 3 hearts beating an irregular rhythm against my exoskeleton. Give us 30 standard minutes. 30 minutes to figure out how to explain why we left their representative to die on a hellscape world. 30 minutes to craft an apology that wouldn't result in the complete obliteration of our civilization. 30 minutes to somehow transform the biggest diplomatic disaster in Zephyrian history into, well, something slightly less catastrophic. The thing is, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. The peace talks on Kepler 42b were going smoothly, surprisingly so. Humans, Zephyrians, and the Keth Confederacy finally sitting at the same negotiation table without anyone trying to vaporize anyone else. Kane was their lead negotiator, and I will admit, the man was good. Too good, perhaps. He had this annoying habit of being right about everything. Resource allocation, Kane had the numbers. Trade route security, Kane had contingency plans for contingency plans. Military cooperation. The humans somehow knew more about our own fleet movements than our admirals did. It was unsettling. But then the storm hit. Kepler 4042b wasn't exactly what you'd call hospitable. The atmosphere was breathable, barely, but the weather patterns were unpredictable at best and homicidal at worst. When the electromagnetic surge struck our landing site, we had maybe 4 minutes to evacuate before the shuttles would be fried beyond repair. Everyone to the transports, I had shouted, my voice barely audible over the howling wind and crackling energy discharges. Move, move, move. The evacuation was chaos. Pure, undiluted chaos. Bodies rushing in every direction. Emergency lights strobing through the acid mist. Alarms blaring their warnings into the maelstrom. I watched our delegates scramble aboard the shuttles, counting heads, checking manifests, doing everything a responsible diplomatic advisor should do. Everything except notice that Marcus Kane wasn't among them. Sir, we need to go now, Pilot Kess had yelled from the transport doorway. The storm's intensifying. I looked around one last time, or at least I thought I did. The visibility was near zero. The electromagnetic interference was playing havoc with our sensors. And honestly, I was more concerned when getting our own people out alive than doing a thorough head count of the human delegation. All aboard, I called out. Lift off, now. It wasn't until we were safely in orbit that someone asked the question that would haunt me for the next 6 months. Where's Kane? The silence that followed was deafening. I checked the manifest, checked it again, cross-referenced it with the shuttle passenger logs. The cold, undeniable truth settled in my stomach like a chunk of frozen plutonium. We had left him behind, on a planet with acid rain, and carnivorous trees, and atmospheric storms that could fry electronics at 50 kilometers. Oh, and did I mention the indigenous predators that hunted in packs and could dissolve metal with their saliva? Because that was definitely a thing on Kepler. We have to go back, Captain Torres of the human delegation had said, her voice deadly calm in that particular way humans had when they were about to do something spectacularly violent. The storm's still active, I had replied, which was true. Our shuttles can't penetrate that kind of electromagnetic interference. We'd be suicide runs. Also true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was terrified. Terrified of going back to that nightmare world. Terrified of finding Kane's remains scattered across the landscape. terrified of having to explain to the human colonial authority how their best negotiator had become alien plant food on my watch. Then we wait, Torres had said. We wait until the storm passes, and then we mount a rescue operation. But the storm didn't pass. It intensified. For 3 days, Kepler 432b was wrapped in a cocoon of electromagnetic fury that made orbital approach impossible. Our sensors couldn't penetrate the interference. Our communications were rook. For 72 standard hours, Marcus Kane was alone on that world, with no contact, no supplies, and no realistic chance of survival. On the 4th day, when the storm finally cleared, we went back. The landing site was changed. The prefabricated structures we'd erected for the peace talks were gone, dissolved by acid rain or blown away by the winds. The ground was scarred by lightning strikes and strange, geometric patterns that definitely hadn't been there before. Of Kane himself, we found no trace. No body, no equipment, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as if he had simply vanished from existence. Atmospheric exposure, I had concluded in my report, combined with indigenous predation and environmental hazards, survival beyond 48 hours would have been impossible for any carbon-based life form. The human colonial authority had accepted this explanation with the kind of grim resignation that comes with losing people in deep space. They held a memorial service. They added Kane's name to the wall of the fallen. They moved on, because that's what humans do. They adapt, they survive, they move forward. Except, apparently Marcus Kane hadn't gotten the memo about being dead. Advisor Vex Prime, my aide's voice crackled through the comm again, more urgent this time. The human fleet commander is demanding immediate response. She says she has someone who wants to speak with you personally. My blood turned to ice. Well, technically my hemolymph turned to a viscous greenish gel, but the effect was the same. I had a sudden, terrible suspicion about who that someone might be. Put them through. I managed to croak. The hologram that materialized in my chamber was definitely human, definitely female, and definitely not in the mood for pleasantries. She wore the uniform of a human colonial fleet admiral, complete with enough medals and ribbons to outfit a small parade. Her expression was the kind of professional courtesy that usually preceded orbital bombardment. Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding HCF Battle Group 7, she said, her voice crisp and precise. I believe you know why we are here, Advisor Vex Prime. Chen, of course it would be Chen, the humans' most decorated fleet commander, their greatest tactical mind, and coincidentally, Marcus Kane's former commanding officer. This was getting better by the minute. Admiral Chen, I replied, attempting to project calm authority while my exoskeleton vibrated with barely contained panic. This is unexpected. Our records indicate that Lieutenant Kane was declared lost during the Kepler 442b incident. Surely you are not here because of... Oh, but I am, Chen interrupted, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was not a pleasant smile. You see, Advisor, reports of Lieutenant Kane's death appear to have been greatly exaggerated. The hologram flickered, and a second figure stepped into view. Marcus Kane looked terrible. His uniform was shredded and patched with what appeared to be organic materials. His skin was scarred by acid burns and claw marks. His left arm was wrapped in some kind of bioluminescent bandage that definitely wasn't human technology. But his eyes held a gleam that made my exoskeleton crawl with unease. Hello, Vex Prime, Kane said, his voice carrying a new edge I'd never heard before. Miss me? I stared at him for a long moment, my 3 hearts hammering against my chest plate. This was impossible. Absolutely impossible. No one could survive 6 months on Kepler. The atmospheric composition alone should have killed him within days, not to mention the predators, the storms, the acid rain, the carnivorous plant life. Kane, I whispered. How did I survive? He tilted his head, that unsettling smile spreading across his scarred features. Well, that's quite a story, Vex Prime. Quite a story indeed. But before I get into the details of my extended vacation on your little death world, I think we need to discuss some reparations. Admiral Chen stepped forward, her expression all business. The Human Colonial Authority has reviewed the circumstances of Lieutenant Kane's abandonment. We have concluded that this was either gross negligence or deliberate action. Either way, advisor, you are going to make this right. The storm, I babbled, my usual diplomatic eloquence, abandoning me completely. We thought he was aboard the shuttles. It was an accident. Was it? Kane asked quietly. Because I have had 6 months to think about it, Vex Prime. 6 months to replay every moment of that evacuation. And you know what I remembered? I remembered you looking right at me as I helped load the injured Keth delegate onto Transport 3. I remembered you nodding at me, and I remembered you giving the all-clear signal while I was still 20 meters from the nearest shuttle. The accusation hit me like a photon torpedo to the thorax. Because he was right. I had seen him. In that last moment before we lifted off, through the swirling mist and chaos, I had spotted Kane helping the wounded alien into safety, and I had made a choice. The Keth delegate was injured, possibly dying. Kane was human, strong, adaptable. If anyone could survive a few extra minutes on that hellish world while we sorted out the evacuation, it would be him. I had calculated the odds, weighed the risks, and made what I thought was a practical decision. I had left him behind on purpose, and he knew it. You wanted the Keth delegate to survive, Kane continued, his voice eerily calm. Political necessity, right? The Keth Confederacy's support was crucial for the trade agreements. One injured alien was worth more than one healthy human. Simple mathematics. Kane, I started, but he held up his hand. Oh, don't worry about it, Vex Prime. I completely understand. Politics is politics after all. Sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. I'm not even angry about it. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. When humans say they are not angry, that's usually when you should start worrying about orbital bombardment. In fact, Kane continued, I'm grateful. Those 6 months on Kepler 42b were education. I learned so much about survival, about adaptation, about the true nature of interspecies cooperation. You might say it was a transformative experience. Admiral Chen's smile had returned, sharper than before. Lieutenant Kane made some very interesting friends during his stay on Kepler, haven't you, Marcus? Kane nodded. The indigenous species were surprisingly receptive to negotiation. Once I figured out how to communicate with them, of course. Did you know that the Keth 442 have been watching our little diplomatic meetings for months? They found the whole thing quite amusing, apparently. 3 supposedly advanced civilizations arguing over trade routes and territory disputes while completely ignoring the planet's actual inhabitants. My blood went cold. The indigenous species of Kepler 442b were barely sentient, according to our surveys. Primitive hunters and gatherers with no technology beyond stone tools and basic shelter construction. They couldn't possibly... Oh, they are quite advanced actually, Kane said, as if reading my thoughts, just in ways we never bothered to look for. Bioengineering, psionic communication, environmental manipulation. They have been terraforming their own world for thousands of years. Vex Prime. Those storms that nearly killed us. Those were artificial, a kind of planetary defense system. The implications hit me like a cascade of falling dominoes. If the Keth 4042 were truly sentient, truly advanced, then our entire colonial expansion into that sector was illegal under galactic law. The trade routes we'd been negotiating, the mining rights, the territorial claims, all of it was void. They are quite interested in joining the galactic community, Kane continued. Under the proper circumstances, of course, with the right representation. Admiral Chen stepped forward again. The Human Colonial Authority is prepared to sponsor the Keth 4042's application for full membership in the Galactic Council. We are also prepared to serve as their advocates in all territorial and resource disputes involving their homeworld. The room seemed to spin around me. This wasn't just about Kane's survival anymore. This was about a complete restructuring of the political landscape in this sector. The humans hadn't just come back for revenge. They'd come back with a new ally. An ally with legitimate claims to one of the most resource-rich systems in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Republic's current mining contracts in the Kepler 4040 system will need to be renegotiated, Chen said matter-of-factly, along with your shipping routes through Kepler 4040 space. I'm sure you understand. Understanding was dawning on me with all the subtlety of a supernova. The humans had turned Kane's abandonment into the diplomatic coup of the century. They'd gained an ally, legitimized their presence in the sector, and positioned themselves as the champions of indigenous rights. All because I'd made one calculated decision to leave their negotiator behind. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Kane's smile widened. Simple. The Zephyrian Republic formally acknowledges the sovereignty of the Kepler 4040 people over their homeworld and surrounding systems. You also provide full reparations for 6 months of illegal mining operations. In exchange, the Kepler 4042 are willing to negotiate new agreements, under human arbitration of course. And if we refuse? Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Well, advisor, I suppose that would depend on how the Galactic Council views your treatment of indigenous peoples, and your tendency to abandon diplomatic personnel on hostile worlds. I imagine they'd be quite interested in reviewing your methods. The threat was clear: accept the new terms, or face investigation by the Galactic Council for violations of colonial law and diplomatic protocol. Either way, the Zephyrian Republic's expansion into this sector was finished. I need to consult with the High Council, I said finally. Of course, Kane replied. Take all the time you need. We will just be up here, enjoying the view of your homeworld. Beautiful planet, by the way. I'd hate to see anything happen to it. The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the weight of my decision. Outside my chamber's viewport, 17 human warships maintained their perfect formation above our world. A reminder that some mistakes have consequences that echo across the galaxy. I had left Marcus Kane for dead on an alien planet. He had come back with a fleet. And now, it seemed, the real negotiations were about to begin. The High Council's emergency session lasted exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes of panicked chittering, desperate calculations, and the gradual realization that we were completely, utterly, spectacularly screwed. Chancellor Korth-9's mandibles clicked nervously as she reviewed the preliminary reports on human fleet positioning. Defense Minister Kex Alpha kept muttering calculations about orbital strike capabilities under his breath. And I sat there contemplating how one moment of calculated pragmatism had just handed the humans the biggest strategic victory in recent galactic history. 17 warships, Chancellor Korth-9 announced to the chamber, including 3 Dreadnought-class vessels and what appears to be a planetary siege platform. The humans aren't here for negotiations, Advisor Vex Prime. They are here for capitulation. With respect, Chancellor, I raised my voice steadier than I felt. I believe they are here for something far more sophisticated than simple conquest. Kane didn't survive 6 months on Kepler 42b just to come back and blow up our homeworld. He learned something down there, something that changes everything. Then enlighten us. Defense Minister Kex Alpha snapped. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your diplomatic incompetence has brought a human armada to our doorstep. Harsh, but not entirely inaccurate. I activated the hologram projector and displayed the preliminary intelligence reports our scouts had managed to gather before the human fleet's arrival. The indigenous species of Kepler 4042b, the ones we classified as barely sentient hunter-gatherers, they are not. They are a highly advanced biotechnological civilization that's been deliberately concealing their capabilities. Kane somehow made contact with them, established communication, and apparently negotiated some kind of alliance. Chancellor Korth-9's eye stalks swiveled toward me. Alliance for what purpose? Territorial sovereignty, resource rights, and most importantly, representation in the Galactic Council. The humans are positioning themselves as the advocates for an entirely new category of member species, indigenous peoples with legitimate claims to worlds we have already colonized. The silence that followed was deafening. The implications were staggering. If the Galactic Council accepted the precedent that hidden indigenous civilizations had retroactive territorial rights, it would invalidate colonial claims across dozens of systems. Mining operations, trade routes, military installations, everything could be challenged. How many other worlds? Kex Alpha asked quietly. Unknown. But if the humans have been systematically surveying for concealed indigenous populations, I let the sentence hang in the air. We all understood the implications. Chancellor Korth9's mandibles clicked in agitation. Open a channel to the human fleet. It's time we heard exactly what Kane wants. The hologram flickered to life, revealing the bridge of what was obviously a human command vessel. Kane stood in the center, no longer wearing his diplomatic attire. Instead, he was dressed in some kind of bio-organic armor that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Behind him, Admiral Chen maintained her professional composure, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Chancellor Korth9, Kane said with a slight bow. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I trust Advisor Vex Prime has explained the situation. He's explained your accusations, the Chancellor replied carefully. What he hasn't explained is what you want from us. Kane's smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more unsettling than Chen's professional coldness. What I want, Chancellor, is to tell you a story, the story of how a human diplomat learned to stop worrying and love evolutionary adaptation. He gestured, and the hologram expanded to show scenes from Kepler 440b. The images were unlike anything in our survey data. Instead of primitive settlements, we saw organic cities that grew from the planet's surface, like living organisms. Instead of stone tools, we saw biotechnological marvels that made our best equipment look like children's toys. When your shuttles left me behind, Kane continued, his tone conversational, I had maybe 4 hours before the atmospheric toxins would kill me. The acid rain was already eating through my environmental suit, and the indigenous predators were starting to take an interest in this strange new addition to their ecosystem. The images shifted to show Kane, battered and exhausted, stumbling through the alien landscape. His suit was failing, his equipment was dying, and he was clearly running out of time. But then something interesting happened. The Keth 442, the primitive locals, found me, and instead of letting me die or finishing me off, they did something completely unexpected. They offered to help. Help? How? Chancellor Korth9 asked, though I suspected she already knew the answer. Kane raised his left arm, the one wrapped in the bioluminescent bandage. As we watched, the bandage seemed to dissolve, revealing skin that was definitely human, but somehow it had a subtle metallic sheen, and patterns of light moved beneath the surface like neural pathways. Biointegration, Kane explained. The Keth 442 don't use technology the way we do. They become it. They adapt to their environment by incorporating it into themselves, and they offered to help me do the same. The implications hit me like a gravity pulse. Biointegration was theoretical technology, something our best scientists had dreamed about, but never achieved. The ability to merge organic and inorganic systems at the cellular level, to adapt to any environment through controlled mutation. The process took weeks, Kane continued, gradually replacing my failing biological systems with hybrid alternatives, adapting my metabolism to process the local atmosphere, modifying my neural pathways to interface with Keth 44 communication networks. By the time it was complete, I wasn't just surviving on Kepler 4040b. I was thriving. Admiral Chen stepped forward. Lieutenant Kane spent the next 5 months learning everything he could about Keth 4040 culture, technology, and territorial claims. What he discovered changes everything we thought we knew about this sector. The hologram shifted again, displaying a 3-dimensional map of local space. Red zones marked Keth 4040 territorial claims, and they were extensive. Their influence stretched across 7 star systems, including 3 that contained major Zephyrian mining operations. The Keth 4040 have been spacefaring for over 2,000 years, Kane explained, but they practice what they call quiet expansion. Instead of building obvious structures or claiming territory through force, they seed worlds with biological monitoring systems. They have been watching us, learning about us, waiting to see if we were worth making contact with. And what did they conclude? I asked, though I suspected the answer wouldn't be flattering. Kane's expression grew serious. They concluded that most species, including the Zephyrians, view other forms of life as either resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. They have been content to remain hidden rather than risk conflict with expanding colonial powers. Until now, Chen added. Kane convinced them that not all species think that way, that humans, specifically, could be trusted to respect their territorial claims and advocate for their interests in the galactic community. The political masterpiece was becoming clear. The humans had gained not just an ally but a category of allies. If they could position themselves as the advocates for hidden indigenous civilizations, they would have legitimate claims to challenge colonial expansion across the galaxy. It was brilliant, terrifying, and completely checkmate. What exactly are your terms? Chancellor Korth 9 asked with resignation. Kane's smile returned. Simple. First, the Zephyrian Republic formally recognizes Keth 4002 sovereignty over their traditional territory. This includes immediate cessation of mining operations in their systems and payment of reparations for resources already extracted. Impossible, Kex Alpha interjected. Those operations represent trillions of credits in infrastructure investment, which brings us to point 2, Kane continued smoothly. The Zephyrian Republic enters into a joint venture agreement with the Keth Foden imitated by human arbitrators. Your mining expertise, their biological technology, shared profits from sustainable resource extraction. I had to admit, it was clever. Instead of simply kicking us out, they were offering us a path to stay involved, albeit as junior partners rather than colonial exploiters. And point 3, the Chancellor asked. The Zephyrian Republic provides full diplomatic support for Keth Foden in the Galactic Council, along with a formal apology for the, shall we say, unfortunate circumstances of my extended stay on their homeworld. The threat was clear: accept the terms, or face the full weight of galactic law regarding indigenous rights violations and diplomatic incompetence. But there was something else, something in Kane's expression that suggested the consequences of refusal would be far more immediate than legal proceedings. And if we refuse these generous terms? I asked. Kane's smile faded. Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, the Keth Foden have been very patient with colonial expansion into their territory. But patience has limit, and they have become quite interested in demonstrating their biotechnological capabilities to the wider galaxy. The hologram shifted to show images that made my exoskeleton crawl with terror. Massive organic constructs rising from planetary surfaces, fleets of living ships that moved like schools of predatory fish, weapons that seemed to grow from the very fabric of space itself. They call it defensive terraforming, Kane explained casually. The ability to rapidly modify entire ecosystems to be hostile to specific genetic markers. Imagine, if you will, a virus engineered to target Zephyrian genetic sequences, spread through atmospheric processes, delivered by seemingly innocent cargo shipments, virtually undetectable until it's far too late. The room fell silent. The implications were clear. Refuse the terms, and the Keth 4042 could potentially render every Zephyrian colony uninhabitable within months. You are talking about genocide, Chancellor Korth 9 whispered. I'm talking about consequences, Kane replied firmly. The Keth 4042 have the capability to defend their territory through biological warfare.
Yes?
But they'd prefer not to. They'd prefer to work with us, to find mutually beneficial solutions to territorial disputes. The choice, Chancellor, is entirely yours. I found myself grudgingly admiring the human's strategy. He'd taken his abandonment and transformed it into the perfect leverage situation. The Zephyrian Republic could accept junior partnership status, or risk complete biological warfare from an enemy we never knew existed. We need time to consider your proposal, Chancellor Korth 9 said finally. Of course, Kane replied. Take all the time you need, but be aware that other colonial powers have received similar invitations to negotiate. The Regilian Empire, the Centauri Collective, the Beta Eridani Federation, the Keth Fourth Oritu are quite thorough in their approach to territorial reclamation. The transmission ended, leaving us to contemplate our rapidly shrinking option. Around the council chamber, the reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just about one abandoned diplomat anymore. This was about a complete restructuring of colonial policy across multiple sectors. Motion to accept the human terms, I said quietly. Chancellor Korth 9 looked at me in surprise. Advisor? We can fight this and probably lose everything. Or we can adapt and possibly retain some influence in the sector. The humans have outmaneuvered us completely, but they are offering us a path forward. I suggest we take it. The vote was unanimous. 3 hours later, I found myself back on the communication platform, facing Kane and Admiral Chen. This time, Kane's expression was genuinely pleased rather than threatening. Excellent decision, Chancellor, he said. I think this arrangement will benefit everyone involved. Even you, Advisor Vex Prime, Chen added. The Keth 4042 have specifically requested that you serve as the Zephyrian liaison for the joint mining operations. Apparently, Kane spoke quite highly of your practical decision-making abilities. I stared at Kane in shock. After everything, after abandoning him on that hellish world, he was actually recommending me for a position in the new power structure. Kane seemed to read my thoughts. You made a calculated decision based on the information available to you, Vex Prime. It wasn't personal, it was practical. The Keth 4040 respect that kind of thinking. They believe you will be an effective advocate for pragmatic solutions to complex problems. Besides, he added, with that unsettling smile, someone needs to make sure the transition goes smoothly, and who better than the person who started this whole thing? As the transmission ended, and the human fleet began moving into escort formation around our homeworld, I reflected on the cosmic irony of the situation. I had abandoned Marcus Kane on an alien planet to save a wounded delegate and preserve a political alliance. He had survived, thrived, and returned with a kind of leverage that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. And somehow, in the process, I had gone from being a disgraced advisor facing court-martial to being the liaison for the most important diplomatic development in Zephyrian history. Humans, I decided, were far more terrifying when they were being helpful than when they were being hostile. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 weeks into the transition period, as Zephyrian mining crews began the complex process of joint operations with Keth 440 bioengineers, something unexpected happened. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about Marcus Kane's miraculous survival. It started with a routine inspection of the orbital platform above Kepler 4. The facility had been abandoned during Kane's ordeal, left to drift in the planet's upper atmosphere while the storms raged below. Now, with the new joint operations beginning, we needed to assess what could be salvaged. What we found defied explanation. The platform's computer systems had been accessed during the storm period. Not damaged, not destroyed, but actively used. Someone had been running complex atmospheric analysis programs, biological adaptation simulations, and most disturbing of all, detailed psychological profiles of every delegate who had attended the peace talks. The access logs show continuous activity for the entire 6-month period, reported Chief Technical Officer Zahn Beta, her voice tight with confusion. Someone was using this platform's resources throughout Kane's supposed isolation on the surface. I stared at the data stream scrolling across the holographic display. The evidence was undeniable. While we believed Kane was fighting for survival in the acid storms below, someone had been conducting extensive research on Zephyrian colonial law, Keth Forshad 2 cultural patterns, and human colonial authority military protocol. Run a biometric analysis on the access codes, I ordered, though my 3 hearts were already sinking with the implications. The results confirmed my growing suspicion. The genetic markers matched Marcus Kane perfectly. That's impossible, Chancellor Korth 9 declared when I presented the findings to the High Council. Kane was stranded on the surface without any means of reaching orbit. Our sensors confirmed it. Unless, I said slowly, he was never actually stranded at all. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Kane's position during the evacuation, helping load the injured Keth delegate onto Transport 3. His perfect positioning to be overlooked during the head count. The convenient timing of his assistance with the wounded alien, ensuring he would be noticed helping, but not accounted for during departure. He planned it, I whispered. Kane planned his own abandonment. But why? What could he possibly gain from 6 months of isolation on a hostile world? The answer came from an unexpected source. During a routine communication check with the Keth 442 settlement, one of their bioengineers made an offhand comment that stopped my circulation cold. The adaptation process for human Kane was remarkably smooth. The alien entity communicated through its living translation symbiont. Most off-worlders require extensive preparation before biointegration can begin safely, but human Kane arrived with preliminary genetic modifications already in place. Very efficient. Preliminary genetic modifications already in place. I pulled Kane's medical records from the diplomatic archives, cross-referencing them with human colonial authority health databases. What I found made my exoskeleton crawl with a mixture of admiration and absolute terror. Marcus Kane had been undergoing experimental genetic therapy for over 2 years before the Kepler 442b mission. Officially, it was listed as treatment for a rare metabolic disorder. Unofficially, the modifications were designed to enhance human adaptability to hostile environments. Enhanced toxin resistance, improved cellular regeneration, modified neural pathways for rapid learning and adaptation. He had been preparing for Kepler 442b long before the peace talks were even scheduled. "Sir," my aide's voice interrupted my horrified contemplation. "Admiral Chen is requesting another communication session. She says it's urgent." The hologram that materialized showed Kane on what appeared to be the surface of Kepler 442b. But the landscape behind him was completely transformed. Instead of the barren, storm-lashed wasteland from our original surveys, I saw a thriving ecosystem of organic structures and biotechnological marvels. "Hello again, Vex Prime," Kane said, his smile broader than ever. "I thought you might be interested in seeing how the integration process is progressing." "Kane," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something. The orbital platform logs show that I was never actually trapped on the surface." Kane finished. "That I had access to orbital facilities throughout my supposed ordeal. Yes, I figured you'd discover that eventually. You always were thorough with your post-mission analysis." The casual admission hit me like a photon blast. "You planned this. All of it. The abandonment, the alliance with the Keth 442, the genetic modifications, everything." Kane's expression grew serious. "Not everything, Vex Prime. I planned for the possibility. The human colonial authority has been aware of concealed indigenous populations for some time. We needed a way to make contact without triggering defensive responses. Direct diplomatic approach would have failed. They would have remained hidden. But a stranded human, desperately in need of help, dying from environmental exposure, that was something they might respond to. So, you engineered your own abandonment to make first contact." "I created the opportunity," Kane corrected. "You made the choice to leave me behind. That was entirely your decision, based on your own priorities and calculation. I simply prepared for the possibility that someone might prioritize political expedience over human life." The psychological warfare was breathtaking. Kane had set up a scenario where my own pragmatic instincts would create the exact situation he needed. He had counted on me to abandon him, had prepared for it, had turned it into the foundation of humanity's greatest strategic victory. The genetic modifications, the platform access, the research into our colonial policies, I said. How long have you been planning this? The specifics, about 3 years. But the general strategy? Humans have been preparing for this kind of operation since we first encountered evidence of hidden, indigenous civilizations. We call it the Lazarus Protocol. Die, learn, return with leverage. Admiral Chen stepped into view behind Kane. Lieutenant Kane volunteered for the first field test of the protocol. His background in xenobiology and diplomatic negotiation made him an ideal candidate. But the risks, I protested. The biointegration could have killed you. The Keth-44-2 could have refused contact. The whole plan could have failed catastrophically. Kane shrugged. All true. But the potential rewards outweighed the risks. And honestly, Vex Prime, I was fairly confident you would make the choice you did. Your psychological profile indicated a strong tendency toward practical decision-making over emotional considerations. When forced to choose between saving a wounded delegate and ensuring a healthy human's evacuation, the mathematics were clear. I found myself simultaneously impressed and horrified. Kane had not only survived being abandoned on an alien world, he had orchestrated his own abandonment as part of a multi-year strategic operation. The level of planning, preparation, and psychological manipulation involved was staggering. There's something else, Kane continued. The Keth-44-2 aren't the only concealed civilization we have discovered. The Lazarus Protocol has been implemented in 14 other systems. As we speak, supposedly dead or missing human operatives are making contact with hidden indigenous populations across 3 sectors of space. The implications were overwhelming. Humanity wasn't just challenging Zephyrian colonial claims in one system, they were systematically undermining the entire basis of colonial expansion across vast regions of space. Within months, dozens of established mining operations, territorial claims, and trade routes could be challenged by newly discovered indigenous people. This is economic warfare on an unprecedented scale, I said. This is justice on an unprecedented scale. Kane replied firmly. For too long, colonial powers have treated uninhabited worlds as free resources while ignoring the possibility of concealed indigenous population. The Lazarus Protocol simply levels the playing field. Chancellor Korth-9's voice crackled through the communication system. Advisor Vex Prime, report to the council chambers immediately. We are receiving similar communications from human fleets in 7 other systems. As I prepared to leave, Kane's voice stopped me. Vex Prime, one more thing. The biointegration process. It's not just about environmental adaptation. The Keth-442 modifications have enhanced my cognitive capabilities significantly. Pattern recognition, strategic planning, psychological analysis. I can see connections and possibilities that weren't visible before. He paused, his enhanced eyes seeming to look directly through the hologram and into my very thoughts. I know exactly what you are thinking right now. You are wondering if this was all an elaborate revenge plot. If I orchestrated my own abandonment just to humiliate the Zephyrian Republic. But here's the thing, Vex Prime. Revenge would have been simple. A quick orbital strike. A diplomatic protest, maybe some trade sanctions. What we have done instead is given you a chance to be part of something bigger. A new model of interspecies cooperation based on respect, rather than exploitation. And if we hadn't accepted your terms, Kane's smile turned cold. Then the Keth-442 would have demonstrated why they have remained hidden for so long. Not out of fear, Vex Prime, out of mercy. The transmission ended, leaving me to contemplate the true scope of what had just occurred. Marcus Kane hadn't just survived being abandoned on an alien planet. He had transformed his abandonment into the opening move of a campaign that would reshape galactic civilization. As I made my way to the council chambers where 7 more impossible situations waited for resolution, I couldn't help but wonder, if Kane could plan and execute something this elaborate, what else were the humans preparing for? What other supposedly dead operatives were out there, making contact with civilizations we never knew existed? Marcus Kane had been left for dead on an alien planet. He had come back with a fleet, an alliance, and a plan that turned his abandonment into humanity's greatest strategic victory. But most terrifying of all, I was beginning to suspect that this was just the beginning. The Lazarus Protocol wasn't a single operation, it was a doctrine. And somewhere out there, more dead humans were preparing to rise again, bringing with them the accumulated wisdom and power of civilizations we had never imagined. The age of unchallenged colonial expansion was over. The age of hidden alliances and impossible resurrections had begun. And it all started because I made one practical decision to leave a human diplomat behind during an emergency evacuation. Sometimes I reflected, the most pragmatic choice is the one that comes back to haunt you with 17 warships and a completely rewritten map of known space.